Welcome, Yadna. All right, let's get underway. Welcome, everyone. I'll just ask Ellie to open with karakia.
Whakakatā te hou ki te uru. Whakakatā te hou ki te tonga. Kia ma kina ki uta, kia ma taratara ki tai. E hau ake ana te apakura. Hei tio, hei huka, hei hauhu, te hei moriora.
Kia ora. Thanks, Harvey. All right, welcome to what is, in a sense, a sort of a special meeting of this committee, specifically to look at the draft annual report and recommend, subject to any finalisation, that's approval by the full council at the end of the month. I don't have any apologies. We have a full committee here, so thank you all. Are there any conflicts of interest anyone needs to declare for today's meeting? I'd be surprised if there were, but no, thank you. I've not been informed of any public participation, and that brings us then to confirmation of actually 3 sets of minutes. The first is the public minutes of our last meeting on the 13th of August. Happy to move it. Thank you, David. Seconded, Chris. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? No. Thank you. Carried. The second set of minutes are the minutes of the public excluded part of our meeting on the 13th of August. Thank you, David. The seconder, Yadna. Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you. Carried. And then the third set of minutes are the restricted public excluded minutes of the 13th of August. And again, I've got Chris moving it, a seconder. David, thank you. Put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you. All right, that was short and sweet. Let's come now to the substantive business of the meeting, which is for us to consider the draft annual report. Can I invite Ashwin and Clint and I'm not sure who else at this stage to come forward? Tyler, sorry. Over to you guys to make some introductory remarks.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for having us today. Of course, we're here to present you with the draft 23-24 annual report. Of course, that includes our financial and our non-financial information summing up the last financial year. I suspect that you've all read the material and are going to have questions for us. So rather than debate too far, we would like to more or less highlight to you that this has been a year of changes, of course. The audit is yet to be completed. However, we are moving forward very quickly with our audit partners. The draft report provides a suitable representation of the performance of Greater Wellington for the year end June 2024. The Council, we recommend that the Council adopts the 23-24 annual report subject to any changes required through the audit process completion. Of course, it's a requirement that we complete these reports under the Local Government Act, and we've prepared them in order for you folks to be able to analyze them before we send them off to Council. Prior to Council receiving the annual report, the committee is responsible for reviewing the report to ensure its accurate representation of non-financial and financial performance, so on and so forth. Rather than reading off everything to you folks, why don't we move into your questions, sir, and what you would like to know?
So I just kind of want to frame, thank you. I think at this stage, I'm sort of wondering, do we want to hear from Clint as well, or do you want to go into the content of the report? My suggestion is we hear from the auditor about where he's at with this, and then we can step our way through the the report and take comments or suggestions. Is that okay? Okay, good.
Thank you, Chi. Kia ora koutou. So just a couple of things in terms of the audit itself. It's progressing well. We've substantially completed most of the financial audit aspects. The only item that remains outstanding is us finalizing our technical advice around the assets held for sale, the flood Riverlink properties that we accounted for last year. So that's we had submitted for some technical advice on receipt of council's own technical advice. That's been prepared, but we don't have a final position on it yet. I'm hoping to get it in the next week. That will result in some adjustment, or may not, if our technical team agrees with where council has landed on that one. The second item was just that there's on the finance side, there's a prior period adjustment relating to commitments. So what's basically happened there is that when the migration to the new system took place, some of the dates were changed, which resulted in extended periods for some of the leases that were in place at that point. And it was calculated on that long period of lease rather than on most of those contracts a month to month. So that will result in us having to restate last year's numbers and then have the correct number. So it doesn't affect the bottom line. It's a disclosure, a note disclosure. So it's not a balance sheet or an income statement item, but it is a disclosure item that will be restated. So that we're working through and just looking at how it will be disclosed. Moving on to the just also to say on the finance side, the flood protection assets were valued this year, full valuation. I might have shared with this committee that the valuation report itself was of a really good quality, good inputs from council and staff in preparing it, and then also peer reviewed. We've had it also peer reviewed by our experts. And we've had responses to those questions and just working through that, but we don't see any changes to that valuation coming from that review. I want to talk about Snapper in its entirety, both from a revenue side and from a performance reporting side. So if you recall, last year we encouraged council to do some work. Sorry, Chair, I thought I had that on silent. Well, I'm sure I'm exempt from that. So we talked about getting assurance over the Snapper revenue and aspect, but we've also extended that into the performance reporting around bus punctuality and train punctuality. So we did, with the assistance of the assurance team here at GWRC, some work at Snapper around their controls and systems, and have, if you like, taken some assurance from that. We did our own testing around the Snapper control environment. We've also engaged our data analytics team. We've taken the data, and they've been able to do, if you like, 100% substantive testing just about through using data analytics on the revenue. So we're in a much better space than we've ever been, I think, around a revenue assurance over the revenue number. We've also thought we'd take it one step further on the bus punctuality, because one of the challenges we have with auditing that it's all GPS information. So how do we know the GPS information is correct? And everyone says trust it. It's an IT system. Our auditors trust no one. So what we've done is taken the Snapper data and overlaid that with the GPS information, because we're able to pick up from the Snapper when someone's tagged on for the first time and get within. So that's gone really well. And so we've got some comfort over the bus side of it. On the Transdev side, we're still waiting some information from them around train punctuality and departure times, and then we plan to do the same. So that's been in train for a while, and I know the GWRC team is trying to get that information for us as soon as they can, so we can close off that, and then I think we're pretty much there with the bus and train punctuality and snapper revenue. The last aspect I want to talk about is greenhouse gases, and there's been a big push on the part of council to get information around how the emissions numbers are calculated. Again, some really good work done within council to prepare papers for us, tabulate the inventory, etc. So we've received that. Our challenge then is to disaggregate some of that information so that we can pick out, if you like, the material components of the inventory that gets reported on, and no surprises there. The public transport aspect is a big part of it. Where we've hit a bit of an issue is around the completeness of that information. So for a period during the year, 79 days to be exact, the bus data is not available. So what's happened is that the number to determine the fuel consumption, because that's what we try to do, boil down to either the diesel or the electricity consumption, has been based on the average, if you like, of the days that you have, the 830 odd days, or more than that, 280 odd days that you have information for. So we're sitting with this issue where, is the average an appropriate way to calculate what would have been the fuel consumptions, and then obviously after that you apply the factors to get to the emissions, but it's whether that source data. So we have a completeness issue that we're trying to work through our technical team to say, well, if we build up all the parts, we've got to this, is that good enough then to apply across the population? So we're just working through that one, Chair. I think what I want to say to this committee is that expect some sort of modification in your audit report around emissions. It's the idea was to move it to an emphasis of matter away from the qualification, but I think the expectation must be it will always be an emphasis of matter, certainly in these early stages, because we've seen the numbers change as well. There's been lots of shifts, and even the baseline data for this year that's been used has changed as more information becomes available. So we would always be looking to draw the reader's attention to that. Chair, I'll leave it at that, and happy to take questions.
Thanks, Clint. What I'm going to do is open it up for questions or comments, and we'll see how that goes. If necessary, we can step our way through the annual report, maybe section by section. I think it might be challenging to do it page by page, but let's at least get some sort of discussion going initially, and we'll see how we go. Chris, I know you.
Look, I'm happy with recommendations. We're looking in that, but there's a technical issue on page 61 of diligent, or page 42 of the annual report. It's Metlink Public Transport, and we talk about the overall summary of the year's performance, and it shows a pictorial depiction of 3 out of 13 issues being achieved. And it says in the performance, 36% of the 13 performance measures to this year were achieved, but 3 out of 13 is 23.1%. And so someone just needs to have a look at that at some stage. And I note that in the recommendations, it notes that there's still corrections to be made in there anyway. So if someone could look at that at some stage, thank you.
Through the chair, note it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have page by page questions, so Sorry about that. Maybe I'll just begin with the point you made, Clint, around the modified opinion we might receive, and just wanting some indication of how what your explanation you've just provided will be noted in the paper going to council, because I think that would be really helpful, because it did say in the paper that you would be providing us an update. Is it possible to have a couple of paragraphs that step us through exactly what you just explained? Is my first question.
Through your chair, yep, happy to provide that. Yep.
So I guess that would be in the audit opinion section. And then in terms of the attachment to the report, which is the draft annual plan, on page 16 of Diligent, there was a point there about public transport in general, noting of the improvements we've made that took a lot of mahi, including improving driver wages. And I don't mean to be pedantic, but I'm wondering if it wasn't just wages that we improved, it was also some of the conditions. So is it possible to reference driver wages and conditions in that one? And then in keeping with the tone that has been used in delivering our core services, I thought in a couple of the other paragraphs where we're talking about biodiversity and bird population, could be nice to mention, you might have noticed more or heard more bird song or spotted more birds. And that sort of kept in tone with the, if you ride the bus, you'll have noticed these changes. So I thought that could be good to reference it there. And maybe a mention of our black coral and some of the highlights of our coastal marine environment would be nice in that opening section. And then my next questions were around some of the performance measures in the MetLink section. So pretty much from around page 64, 65 and 66 of Diligent, which was more about, I guess, our next annual report and what is this work cycle for us to set the KPIs going forward. Because I can already sense, and we've talked about it a few times at Transport Committee, at this committee and at Council, that some of the externalities with Kiwi Rail, our decision to slow down our decarbonisation of our fleet will impact these measures we've set. So my question is, at what point do we get to review those KPIs? Because I already get a sense we might not achieve some of our targets given some of the decisions we've made in the context we're operating in. That's all.
Do you want to comment on that and then move on to your next one?
Absolutely. Through the chair, we are absolutely looking at our KPIs on an annual basis. However, our KPIs then tag back to our long-term plan as well. So the big reviews we do every 3 years for the 10-year long-term plan, but we can assess those each annual plan as we go forward. So for our KPIs at the moment, we're looking at for the 25-26 year. When we come back to you next year, we would then look at the 26-27 year.
And then my other question was, I guess there were some comments in the narrative as well around, it's page 67, where it was talking about bus reliability, frequency, quote, having enough seats available. I think at a previous transport workshop, perhaps, we discussed how our capacity, our approach to improving capacity might actually include more standing rather than fewer seats. So again, I'm just hoping our KPIs and performance indicators are going to reflect some of the conversations and decisions we're making on account of the funding constraints we're existing in. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, Yana. Other questions or comments? Ross?
So I have a couple of comments that aren't really questions. I guess as far as I was concerned, there weren't really any surprises in this annual report, which is potentially the way it should be. Everything in here was really well signalled. In particular, the fact that we had done better around our capital program, which I know is something that we've worked on. Though I do also feel a little bit like that was propped up by water projects in the water space, and that if if Wellington Water hadn't been doing bridges for us, we might not be reporting such a favourable result in that space. So a little bit misleading potentially when you see the raw numbers there. Two other comments from me, just around, I mean, the deficit that we saw in the Metlink space. Again, really, really well signalled. We've talked about this on innumerable occasions around the council table. And we've also grilled Clint on previous occasions about the assumptions and what's the word? Predictions that we're using to come up with our figures for the current year in terms of whether they're going to accurately land us in the right financial place. But 1 month or 1 quarter in, we're already seeing that the alignment is not terribly good. So I know that this isn't really the place to be examining things moving forward. This is backward looking, but it still does worry me, the fact that those assumptions and predictions we've made around fair revenue are not working the way that we predicted. Yeah.
Thank you. Through your chair. Yeah, I was just going to say the reforecast. So yes, in the bus space, the levels against budget have been fine, but it is in the averages in rail due to a decrease in the number of people taking longer and more expensive trips, reducing the average. We will take this into account. We're about to do a reforecast or do our first lot of forecasting to the end of the year and bring it to council as part of the October financial reporting. And one of the things we are going to be looking at is having another look at the patronage levels as part of that. So we'll be looking at bringing a reforecast, balancing the budget based on updated numbers. So that is coming quite soon.
Awesome. I guess for us the challenge is also what can we do to arrest those numbers, if anything. But then if we can't turn those numbers around, how can we change our operating model to produce a lower cost service to reflect the fact that we're getting less money in? So coming up with new forecasts alone isn't really sufficient. We need to then think about what we're going to do as a result of that. But it's really good to hear that that's coming in a future space. The only other thing I wanted to comment on was the flood asset management stuff. I just looking around the table, I noted that I'm the only one here from our Te Awa Kairangi committee, and I did want to just point out that at the last Te Awa, so every year or regularly, we are presented with asset management results for the flood management, the big stop banks, etc., along Te Awa Kairangi. And this year, the committee did not approve the report that was presented to us around the status of the assets in Te Awa Kairangi. Now, the reason was we didn't believe we had enough information to judge which assets were the critical assets and what condition those assets were in. So we've asked for a future report coming back to us, but I just wondered if that message had got through when you were talking about flood assets and flood resilience, that the committee did not feel that the information being supplied, particularly around the critical flood protection assets, was of a sufficient standard to give us confidence that we were doing the right things in the asset management space.
Through the chair, note it. We'll go back to the assets folks and make sure that we understand properly.
Thanks, Ross. Any other sort of questions or comments from committee members? I've got a couple of things I wanted to raise, but I just say. Yep.
Can I just first of all say congratulations to the staff, because I think it's a very good report, and I've made a real commitment to read through it, which I did, and I think there's some very, very good information. And one of the things that came to my mind, we spent a lot of resources on developing this report, and what actually happens to it after this has been completed. Yes, we've met our legal obligations, but how can we potentially get some of the positive information out to our community. Now, we'll probably do a press release, but I just sort of thinking, how can we actually do that? Because there's a lot of apathy out there in the community towards local government, and I think there's some wonderful stories in here. And I just wondered how we could actually get that out.
David, I might let the others respond to that, but you've sort of scratched or touched on an issue that I'll pick up later, which is sort of not so much around this report, but how we might continue to develop the reporting regime in the future, which connects the point you're just raising, but more specifically, you're asking about how we kind of get better coverage for the report that's in front of us.
Through a chair, I think that's something we will have a conversation with our comms and engagement team in terms of how to get that engagement a bit wider within the community as well. So we'll have that conversation with comms and we can come back to you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Simon or Hikiti, do you have anything? No? Can I just raise then a couple of my thoughts? And let me start at a very high level, because I think, dare I say it, I spent 10 years for the Institute of Chartered Accountants as the chief judge of their annual report awards, a foolish kind of thing to do for so long. But I thought a lot about annual reporting and kind of how you tell your story. And it really is quite important, it seems to me, that for us at least as a committee, in recommending to the full council that it adopt this report, that we're satisfied that it effectively tells the story about what we're here for, what we set out to achieve, and how well we did. And I think the comments that have already been made by members of the committee indicate that you're sort of broadly happy, subject to the issues that have been raised. The thing that I wondered about for this report, it's an easy thing to consider, was what I always felt was really helpful at the front end of a report is something that's sort of in the first couple of pages, which says our purpose as an organisation is to. These are the things that we're strategically focused on trying to achieve, so that when you start to even go into the overview from the chair and chief executive, you've already got that sort of context about the role of Greater Wellington Regional Council is to do the following things. These are the things that we're specifically sort of trying to achieve as an organisation. And that's the sort of foundational kind of knowledge to kind of put everything else in context. And it's in the report, I'm not denying that, but I just kind of wonder whether it would be useful to have it in the first sort of almost inside cover of the annual report.
Through you, Chair, I think that's absolutely something we can look at to do. Sam, as our primary author here, is really working on how we can tell our GW stories better to our communities, not just the positives, but also the areas that we need to improve on. And we hope that you're seeing that coming through these reports. Things like this are very easy for us to implement, so we appreciate your suggestions.
And I think the other thing, and this is more for the future, I think the storytelling, I think one of the things that's quite helpful, because I think there are lots of great stories and they're already in here, but to almost kind of use them as sort of case study type stories, because that allows people to sort of see in a snapshot, something like, around each of the sort of main areas, but to tell them as almost a separate sort of little case study story. But I think we're too far into this process to be sort of doing that now, but that might be something to think about for the future.
If I could just make a comment on those couple of points, through the chair. I think the first thing is we've only just recently finished our long-term plan. Of course, that is the document in which we tell the community what we do and what we're about and what we're trying to achieve. So that, and we had an extensive engagement process with that. So that you can't see the annual report as in isolation. It's part of a suite of documents. I think it's the first thing. And the second thing is that we do have, as well as this particular document, which is the full annual report, we also put a summary document on our website, which is more interactive. And people can actually go in and search for things and click on things and find case studies and other bits of information that will be more interesting and user-friendly than this rather lengthy tome. So there are other things that people can access information from.
That's great. And that's sort of really, since you've raised that, I'll pick it up, because I think the challenge for the future is actually taking what you've just described as the summary report. I've always kind of thought, and this is not about this report, I think, but it's for the future, that we're producing these reports kind of as linear documents. You start at page 1 and you read to kind of page 100 and whatever it is. And there are a limited number of people who are going to do that. It goes to David's question about how do we get to kind of the community and the different communities of interest. And my challenge, I suppose, for the future, and this is as much challenge to the auditors as well as it is to the preparers, is actually in this day and age to think about the annual report as a digital product rather than a physical product. And if you design it as a digital product, like a website or whatever, then it allows different readers to navigate the document according to their sets of interests. And so you don't have to start at page 1 and read to page 35 to get what you want. You can kind of go in and navigate the document in a different way. It may not fulfill our statutory requirements for an annual report, but it might provide a way of presenting the information which is actually much more usable by the people to whom the report is directed, which is the public and other stakeholders. So that's a kind of challenge, I think, is when we start thinking about the next annual report, what if we started thinking about it as a digital product rather than an analog product? So just think about that. Ross.
I guess that sort of speaks to the point I made first, was the fact that there were really no surprises in this. And everything had been talked about and signalled a long time before it got to this point. So are you kind of getting at the idea that as these events happen, like great bus patronage or issues around finances, that we should be putting them into something annual report-ish as they occur rather than at the end of the period, kind of making it live, I guess, rather than retrospective?
I wasn't doing that, but it's a good point nonetheless, because I do think one of the challenges with annual reporting is kind of this an assumption that people are going to wait till kind of 4 months after the end of the financial year to kind of get the information. So I think we can think about those things. That would be unaudited, obviously, but we can think about how you might design something that allows you to kind of fill it out as you go. I think what I was really focusing on is how my somewhat cynical perspective is I suspect there are very few people out there who pick up the annual report and read it from page 1 through. And that's because actually people access their information in different ways and want to consume it in different ways. And so if I'm someone who's particularly interested in the environmental activities and performance of council, I know I can go into this analog version of report, and I can go to the section on that. But I think if I'm searching on the website and I have to click on the annual report and then find my way through the PDF version on the annual report, I've got to work quite hard to find that stuff. Whereas actually, if it was designed as a digital document, I'd go onto the website, I could say, environmental performance, I click on that and I'll be able to follow it through. This is just an idea that I'm encouraging us to think about in terms of, in a mid-21st century environment, how do we produce the information in a way which is actually more likely to get to the target audience? Simon.
If I could just add to that, Martin, the idea of the some highlights on that front page is great, because people hear of an annual report and they think technical straight off, and some of the achievements that have been gained through the 2 years that I've been on here you could have 6 of those, that are, succinct, illustrated, and are more people facing. I look at some of the examples that are best practice. For instance, and I'm not sure if it comes into this financial year, but the Kapiti Whaitoa, and the model that we used, which was best practice. I look at the achievements that have been made in Wairarapa, for instance, with farmers doing plantings and having kids in schools focus attention on seedlings and some of the more human aspects rather than the more technical approach with the numbers. You have to have the numbers too, but people will then be interested. And I think what you're,
Chris.
Thank you. I'm not sure of the legal position here, but in another organisation I was involved in, our annual report, which was very glossy and looked beautiful, but it had about 80% of it was financials. And what we did is we produced a annual review, which is really a marketing tool saying what we were doing, and it was a qualitative rather than quantitative, and it only had 2 or 3 pages of annual financials in it, and it had a reference to our web page where all of the details were available in, like you've said, an easy format to be able to access it in that. And it was more meaningful to the public because they could see what we were doing in a qualitative manner. And for those people that wanted the financial detail, they were doing it. It's much more cost effective as well, because the thick annual reports we do are very expensive, but I don't know where we stand legally and what we can do there. But in the first year we tried to do that, there was resistance around the board table. The second year it just got 100% report, and it's a matter of people getting the concept through their head about how annual reports are used. And a lot of people, in my view, don't need most of the information in there. And I think also we can tell a better story when we talk about our environment highlights, our transport highlights, recognise the things we all have problems with and that. I think it's more meaningful for the community that we serve. And it's easier to put out, 2,000 or 3,000 copies to all of the community groups rather than sending out something that really most people use if they want to fall asleep at night or something like that. So a few people need all the financials, but most don't. So I think we should suggest formally that consideration be given to whether we can legally do such a thing, and plan for the next annual report if that's so. Thank you.
David.
When I sort of made the suggestion, I'm certainly not thinking of promulgating the annual report to the community in terms of the large document. And I agree with what you've said, Martin. It's about drip feeding positive information to the community. How do we actually do that? I think there are a number of ways. I mean, if you look at a territorial, they're sending out a rate demand every two months. We're not in that position to be able to do that. Could we link into that system in some way to talk about the positives? So those are some of the things that I would actually like to be seen out, and actually drip feeding it to the community will actually then, they will pick up the message of what the regional council is doing and actually what it's achieving, because I'm sure all elected members get the request, what does the regional council do? What is it achieving? And I think I would like the communications group to have a look at it and see just what we can do.
Okay, I feel like I've opened something. Clint, here. I was going to have a question for you as well, but
Thanks, Jay. I think it's a really useful discussion. This because I'm a bit offended with Councillor Chris saying that we fall asleep reading it. I do this for a living. Always get excited reading annual reports, But I think you know, for us in terms of your legal requirements, it's reporting against your LTP first and foremost, and your financial statements. That's your requirement. What the chair's talking about, I think, around the case studies and all the other information that goes with it that we don't opine on. You know, there might be other avenues to how you report that and package that. The only challenge I put with that or to this committee is that, you know, you want to also tell a balanced story, you know, so it's not only the good news, but what are the challenges, because otherwise people are in a headspace that all is good, nothing to look at here. So that would be my only caution. It's about getting the story balanced, whether you do it annually or every quarter or every month. It's getting that balance right.
Yadna, you had your hand up.
It was just a suggestion in response to David's question, which is a discussion that has come up many other times. I wonder if maybe you might want to send an email to the Councillor Comms cohort, because that would be a useful place to put that question. We meet, I can't remember the frequency of it, but there are a group of councillors who are talking with the comms team. Perhaps you want to drop us a note to have that on our agenda.
Good suggestion.
One of the things that I've actually thought about is that we've got, 7, 8, what it is, territorial authorities in our region. We could actually, because of the size of these councils, it could be actually, for example, tailored to, say, for example, Roz's ward, just about what is actually going on there, and becomes a real focus because they can relate to it straight away.
All right. Look, thank you for those comments. I think as a result of this, there are two sort of parallel ideas in play. One is, you know, enhancing sort of regular communications around council performance, and maybe I pick up Yadna's suggestion if that were something you were to pick up with the communications team and councillors involved. The second issue is the one I'm raising, which is really just about future annual reports, which is, and none of my remarks are in any way taking away from what's in front of us as a draft annual report. I think it's it's very good. All I'm suggesting is let's challenge ourselves to kind of think about how do we release the information about our performance in a way which makes it increasingly accessible in a mid-21st century environment, and that's the challenge, to have a think about it. And I'm going to pick up, I think, Chris's suggestion is whether or not we could just have an added recommendation, which is just to invite, or whatever the appropriate wording is, council officers to give further thought to, or give some thought to, how we might further improve the way in which we present annual reports in the future, and leave it open in a sense. But it might be something to at least come back to us as a committee, you know, in 6 months' time or whenever, and let's have another conversation once you've had a chance to think about opportunities. Does that sound all right?
Through the chair, absolutely. We spoke quite in depth multiple times throughout the long-term planning process about how we could create better accessibility to this type of information. We did some pretty similar work throughout our consultation process for the long-term plan. Myself, as our internal diversity, equity, inclusion committee chair, is something I'm quite passionate about. So we hear you, and we'll have a think.
Right, thank you. If I can, with your indulgence, just come back, Clint, to the greenhouse gas issue. So this is sort of sublime to the ridiculous in some respects, but the specific issue is obviously an ongoing issue around verifiability of the disclosures. I get that you will work through how the sort of uncertainty is dealt with in your audit report. I did want to just sort of make the comment to the committee at least, and note that I think it's important for us to continue to kind of make these disclosures and improve the way in which they're sort of done. I think there's quite an extensive explanation in the document around, you know, what we're disclosing and how those disclosures are developed. I think some information is better than no information personally. So I'm philosophical about the fact that as auditors you have difficulty verifying it, but I accept that you need to draw the reader's attention to that fact. But I think from a council point of view, the disclosure is important, and we should continue to sort of back ourselves to at least be, you know, making those disclosures and continuing to improve them.
Absolutely, Chair. And I think, you know, the last thing we want to see is councils going silent on this. The level of disclosure that you see in the annual report, I think, doesn't even represent the amount of work that happens in the background to get to that point. There's a lot of good work that we've seen in council, and that's challenging to audit, but there's really good information, a lot of science in it as well, if I can use that phrase, you know, and it's one of those things that you want to tell more about, a good story about. So I think, you know, I was chatting to someone that's in the standard setting space, and they were saying, you know, I think the XRB is coming out and saying entities, and we're talking the large multinationals, have to expect to see something in their audit report around this until it's all settled and we're into a normal regime. So, you know, that's one of the things we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's part of the transition. All right, with that, can I just check with members of the committee, having raised your issues, do we want to go through the report in any more detail, or are we happy to put the recommendations in front of us? Put the recommendations? Okay, so we have...
Can I just be quite clear? I'm happy with the recommendation, no question about that. But I just would like to see something documented about officers coming back to us about how we can promote this whole thing.
So I think
Elizabeth
and Lucas have had a go at putting something here. So do you want to...
Yeah, so we've added in a fourth recommendation, which is request officers to consider how to present future annual reports to promote accessibility, and we'll put a note in the minutes regarding communications around annual reports.
And with a timeline.
Yeah.
Very flexible on that.
Before I put this, are we happy with that amendment? Is that wording acceptable? Not about discussion? Okay, so you happy to move? Can I second it, Chris? Any further discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you all for the work you've done on this. I know it's a mammoth exercise, and thank you, Clint, for your comments. We look forward to kind of ultimately seeing the final result of your audit. Thank you. That, I think, deals with the business of the meeting. Unless there's anything else, I will ask Ellie to close the meeting with karakia.
Unihia, unihia, unihia ki te uru tepanui. Kia waitea ki mama te naika o te tinana. Te wairua I te ara takata. Koeara I rungo whakakaria ake ki runga. Kia tina, tina, hui e, taki e.
Thank you all.